Have you ever felt that there is something inside your mind trying to speak to you, but can't you fully understand what it is, as if it were an idea that arrives soft, almost silently, and yet carries a strange weight, as if it were too important to ignore? And the more you try to explain, the more it seems to escape, as if it were right in front of you, but hidden behind an invisible veil, leaving only a lingering sense that there is something greater going on within your own thought. There are times when everything slows down inside, even when the world outside keeps going fast. And in that strange silence, thoughts start to come up differently, not as ordinary concerns, but as deep impressions. Almost as if someone is trying to show you a way, a direction that you've never considered before, and that unsettles because at the same time it brings a certain peace. It also raises questions that you don't know how to answer. And if this restlessness is not confusion, but a calling? What if those thoughts that come out of nowhere, in the middle of the silence, are not yours, but placed there with a purpose that you have not yet understood? There is something hidden in this process, something that has always been present but that few people have learned to recognize, a form of communication that does not rely on audible words but is still clear, precise, and transformative. Most people spend their entire lives ignoring this detail, treating as coincidence what may actually be direction, treating as imagination what may be an answer. And that is why they continue to be stuck in the same cycles, without realizing that the way out has already been whispered within their own mind. The Bible reveals something profound in Proverbs 20:27. The spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, which searches every inmost part of the body. And that changes everything, because it means that there is a kind of light burning within you, a place where God is already speaking, even if you haven't realized it yet. There is a way to understand it, but it is not obvious, it is not common, and almost no one teaches it in the right way, because it is hidden in something too simple to be valued, but too deep to be ignored. And today, something is going to be revealed here that can completely change the way you see your own thoughts. Something that is not theory, not opinion, but a living spiritual secret. And if you stay until the end, you will not only understand, you will begin to realize it today. And along this path, you will begin to realize something that may never have been taught in this way, because here it will be revealed how God uses simple thoughts to deliver deep directions, how he plants ideas that bring peace even in the midst of chaos, and how invisible signs begin to make sense within your own mind. You will understand how to recognize when it is God speaking, how to respond to that voice, and how to align your life with a greater purpose based on principles that have always been in the Word. In Romans 12:2 it is written, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that is exactly what is beginning to happen here. And there is something important in all this, because maybe it is not by chance that you have reached this moment. So enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because by doing so, you also become part of something bigger, helping this message to reach lives that need to hear exactly that today. What if everything you've always called your thought was never really yours alone? There is something going on inside your mind right now, as you listen to this, that goes far beyond logic, memory, or habit. Because the human mind is not just a reasoning space. It is an active spiritual territory where invisible influences are acting all the time, shaping decisions, creating directions, and often trying to lead you down paths that you don't even realize you are following. The Bible reveals a detail that many ignore. Thoughts are not neutral. They carry origin, intention, and purpose. And this completely changes the way you begin to observe what goes on inside your head, because not everything that seems natural really is. There are thoughts that come bringing peace, clarity, a firm direction even without logical explanation. and there are others that generate weight, confusion, doubt, and restlessness, as if something is misaligned within you. And it is exactly at this point that something profound begins to happen. Because God has chosen this invisible place to speak, not only through external signs, but through internal impressions that arise in subtle but meaningful ways. Daniel lived this intensely. He did not depend only on supernatural visions, but received understanding within his mind as he sought God, as if answers were released from the inside out. In Daniel 2:22 it is written, "He reveals the deep and the hidden. He knows what is in darkness, and with him dwells the light." This means that there is a light capable of illuminating even the most hidden thoughts, bringing understanding where there was doubt before. And maybe now you start to remember moments when something inside you tried to warn you, direct you, show you a way, but you ignored it, thinking it was just impression, coincidence, or even fear. But it wasn't. It was in this very place that God was trying to speak to you. The mind then becomes a field of discernment, a space where you begin to notice patterns, to identify what brings peace and what robs you of your tranquility, what builds and what destroys. And this demands attention, because the more you ignore, the harder it becomes to recognize, but the more you observe, the clearer everything begins to become. And there is something even deeper in this, because the more you learn to distinguish these voices, the more sensitive you become to that which comes from God, as if your mind begins to be trained to recognize what was previously unnoticed. If this message is somehow touching you from within, maybe it's no coincidence. Maybe it's exactly the moment when you needed to start noticing it more clearly. And if you felt this understanding coming in a different way, write in the comments, Amen, because sometimes a simple answer is the first step for something to start changing within you. And the more you begin to perceive this movement within your mind, the more a silent truth begins to reveal itself. God does not cry out to be heard. He whispers to be discerned. And this completely changes the way you understand divine communication, because perhaps you have spent your whole life waiting for something extraordinary, visible, unquestioning, while ignoring what was already happening constantly inside you. The prophet Elijah lived exactly this moment of breaking expectation. He was waiting for God to manifest himself in the strong wind, in the earthquake, in the fire, in something great that would attract attention. But God was not in any of these signs, and it was only when everything quieted down that something different happened. In 1 Kings 19:12 it is written, "And after the fire a still small voice." And that is where many let it pass, because this voice does not invade, does not force, does not cause fear. It arrives as a clear, calm thought, but with a firmness that does not depend on explanation. Perhaps you have already felt this, a thought that arises in a simple way, but that carries such a strong direction that it seems impossible to ignore. Something that does not bring confusion, does not bring anxiety, but a calm certainty, as if, in the midst of so many voices, that one was different, cleaner, lighter, safer. And here there is a point that changes everything. God does not compete with the noise of the world. He does not try to speak louder than your worries, your fears, or your distractions. He expects you to learn to silence enough to realize that he is already speaking, and this requires sensitivity, because the more agitated the mind is, the more difficult it becomes to recognize this whisper. This is why many people say that God does not answer, when in fact they have not yet learned to perceive the way he answers, because they expect an external voice, but they ignore the internal movement. They expect a visible sign, but they do not value the direction that has already been placed within them. And the more you start to pay attention to this, the more you realize that these thoughts do not come loaded with pressure, but with direction. They do not come with fear, but with clarity. They do not push, but lead, like a path that reveals itself step by step within your own mind. If this word is awakening within you a real desire to hear God more clearly, perhaps this is the time to respond to it in a simple but sincere way. Write in the comments, "Speak, Lord, your servant hears," as an open prayer. And if this message is helping you to see something that you had never noticed before, leave your like, because that can take that same direction for other people who are also trying to understand that quiet voice. And as this sensitivity increases within you, something even deeper begins to happen. Because at certain moments thoughts arise that do not seem to have been born from your own logic. They arrive complete, clear, with a direction that you were not building, as if they simply appeared ready within your mind, bringing a solution, an alert, or even an answer that you did not even know you needed at that moment. And this is where many get confused, because these thoughts are so natural in form, but so different in content, that they go unnoticed, as if they were just another common idea, when in fact they carry a much deeper origin. Joseph, son of Jacob, lived exactly this. He not only had dreams, but received interpretations that did not come from his human capacity. He himself recognized this before Pharaoh in Genesis 41:16. "This is not in me. God will give a favorable answer to Pharaoh." There is a signature in these thoughts, something that differentiates them from everything else. They do not come loaded with doubt, but with direction. They are not born from haste, but arrive with precision, and often bring solutions that you would never have built alone, paths that you were not seeing, decisions that begin to make sense in an unexpected way. Maybe you've already experienced it and didn't realize it, that moment when something inside you clearly told you not to go down a certain path, or on the contrary, pushed you to make a decision that seemed risky, but then turned out to be exactly what needed to be done. These are signs of a communication that happens before the events, as if God is preparing the way within your mind before reality manifests itself around you. And there is a very serious point in this, because ignoring these thoughts can be costly, not only in wrong decisions, but in opportunities that were directed and not recognized. Often God speaks first within and then acts without, but if the interior is ignored, the external loses alignment. Therefore, begin to observe more carefully what arises within you without effort, what brings clarity without confusion, what remains even when you try to ignore it. Because it may not be just any thought. It may be direction. It may be an answer. It may be God trying to lead you silently, but extremely precisely. And if at some point you have felt that something like this happened to you, even without being able to explain it, maybe now it makes more sense. Maybe now you start to see that you were not alone in those moments. If this truth has touched you in any way, write in the comments, "I believe." Because sometimes a simple statement makes room for something bigger to start moving within your life. And this is exactly where many people get lost, because they begin to realize that there are different thoughts arising within the mind, but they do not know how to identify where they come from. And this can become dangerous, because not every voice that seems convincing is true. Not every thought that seems right is aligned with God. There is a silent battle going on within the mind, and discerning this is not only important, it is essential to not walk in the wrong direction, believing that you are being guided correctly. The Bible itself warns about this very clearly in Jeremiah 17:9, when it says, "The heart is deceitful above all things," showing that feelings and thoughts may seem true, but still be distorted. And at the same time, there is a powerful promise that brings security to those who seek with sincerity. In John 10:27, it is written, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Do you see the difference? There is deception, but there is also recognition. There is confusion, but there is also clarity. And the key point is to learn to distinguish. God's voice within the mind doesn't generate despair. It doesn't push you into rash decisions. It doesn't create paralyzing fear or suffocating anxiety. On the contrary, it brings a firm peace, even when the path seems challenging. It brings direction without pressure, clarity without confusion, truth without contradiction. Other voices, on the other hand, are marked by uncontrolled urgency, constant doubt, unresolved restlessness, thoughts that change all the time and never take hold. And here there is a criterion that transforms everything. Look at the fruits. A thought that comes from God produces peace, even before the answer appears. It aligns you with the truth of the Word. It doesn't conflict with what God has already revealed. It builds, strengthens, directs. On the other hand, thoughts that lead away from peace, that feed fear, that encourage impulsive decisions or attitudes contrary to what is right, do not carry the same origin. And perhaps now you will begin to realize how many times you have felt this inner conflict, one voice telling you to wait, while another pressed to act, one bringing calm, another generating restlessness. This was not confusion for nothing. It was exactly the need for discernment manifesting within you. The more you observe, the clearer it gets. The more you seek alignment with God, the easier it becomes to recognize what comes from Him. And this process does not happen all at once. It develops, it grows stronger, it becomes more evident over time, until the voice of God becomes familiar within your mind. If you are here so far, it is because something within you is being awakened. There's a reason you're hearing this, and maybe it's the beginning of a new way of looking at your own thoughts. And at the end of this path, there will be a moment of deep connection, a prayer that can align your mind with God in a real way. So stay until the end, because what is yet to be revealed can completely change how you hear, understand, and respond to God's voice within you. And once you begin to discern these voices, an inevitable question arises within you. Why does it sometimes seem so difficult to recognize clearly that which comes from God? The answer lies not in the absence of the divine voice, but in the condition of the mind that tries to hear it. An overloaded mind, influenced by world patterns, negative thoughts, accumulated fears, and constant distractions, loses spiritual sensitivity like an out-of-tune radio that can't pick up the right signal. That is why the renewal of the mind is not just a detail in the spiritual life. It is a portal. It's the point where everything starts to line up. The Apostle Paul reveals this directly in Romans 12:2 when he says, "That you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." This means that it is not possible to fully live God's will without undergoing a transformation in the way we think. And this transformation does not happen from the outside in. It starts on the inside, in the quietest thoughts, in the beliefs you feed, in the ideas you accept as truth. The more the mind is exposed to God's truth, the more it begins to cleanse itself of everything that distorts spiritual perception. And the cleaner it becomes, the easier it is to recognize when God is speaking. Perhaps you have already noticed that in moments of greater spiritual connection, everything seems clearer, decisions become simpler, thoughts gain direction, as if something inside you is organized. But at other times, when the mind is full of worries, distractions, or negative influences, everything seems confusing, heavy, difficult to understand. This is no coincidence. It is the direct reflection of the state of the mind. A renewed mind creates an environment where thoughts of God flow more naturally, where peace becomes a constant sign, where truth begins to stand out in the midst of so many voices. And this does not happen all at once. It is a continuous process, a daily choice to filter what comes in, to observe what remains, to align what is misaligned. And the more this process progresses, the more you perceive something impressive. The voice of God ceases to seem distant and begins to become familiar, as if it has always been there. But now you can finally recognize it. If at this moment you feel that you need this renewal, that something inside you needs to be aligned, perhaps this is the opportunity to take a simple but powerful step. State in the comments, "Lord, renew my mind," as an act of sincere surrender. And if that message is opening your eyes to something new, leave your like, because it can help others find that same clarity that starts within the mind. And there is an even more subtle and at the same time powerful way for God to speak to you through the mind, something that many have experienced, but few realized what was really happening at that moment. Has it ever happened that, in the middle of a difficult situation, a word, a verse, a specific memory suddenly appears, something that seemed forgotten, but appeared exactly when you needed it most? This is not a coincidence. This is direction. Jesus revealed this secret clearly in John 14:26, when he said, "But the Comforter will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you." This means that the Holy Ghost not only teaches, but also activates memories at the right time, bringing to mind that which has already been planted, but which needs to be revealed at that very hour. And notice how this happens precisely. It's not just any memory. It's not something random. It's something specific, directed, which fits perfectly with the situation you're experiencing. It may be a word you have heard for years, a verse that seemed far away, a simple phrase, but at that moment carries a different force, as if it were alive inside you. This happens because God uses your own memory as a communication channel, as if He accesses what has already been stored inside you and brings it to the surface at the exact moment it becomes necessary. And when that happens, there's a different clarity, a sense that it didn't just come from you, but was put there for a purpose. Maybe you've already ignored moments like this, thinking it was just your mind working normally. But when you start paying attention, you realize that there is a pattern. These memories arrive at strategic moments when you need direction, confirmation, or even a warning. And that strengthens something very important, because when God brings those words to mind, He not only guides, but also strengthens faith, bringing security in the midst of doubt, bringing light in the midst of uncertainty. It is as if, in the middle of the way, you receive small confirmations that you are not alone, that there is a direction being built within you. And the more you value these moments, the more frequent they become, because your mind begins to align with this spiritual dynamic, becoming more sensitive, more attentive, more prepared to recognize when God is speaking through these memories. If this message is already making sense to you in a special way, maybe it's not by chance, maybe it's exactly God using it to speak to you until this moment. And if you feel like it's awakening something inside of you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because by doing that, you help that message reach other people who also need to recognize that voice that speaks so subtly, yet so powerfully within the mind. And in the midst of all this, there is a sign that does not deceive, a silent marker that clearly reveals when a thought comes from God. Something that does not depend on logic, does not depend on circumstance, does not depend on human explanation, but that manifests itself in a real way within you. Peace. Not a superficial, momentary, or emotional peace, but a deep, firm peace that remains even when everything around seems uncertain. Maybe you've experienced it without realizing it. That moment when you had to make a difficult decision, everything seemed confusing externally, but inside you there was an inexplicable rest, as if, even without fully understanding, something said that this was the right path. This is not common, this is spiritual. In Philippians 4:7 it is written, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds." Notice what is being revealed here. This peace exceeds understanding. That is, it does not need to make logical sense to exist. It simply establishes itself as a sign, as a silent confirmation that there is alignment between that thought and the will of God. It is like an invisible seal that validates what is being directed within your mind. And when this peace is present, there is a different lightness, an absence of pressure, a security that does not force but sustains. On the other hand, when a thought does not come from God, something inside you reacts. It may even seem right on the outside, but inside there is restlessness, a discomfort that is not resolved, a feeling that something is not completely fitting. This is one of the most powerful filters you can develop to observe peace. Not just what feels right, but what brings rest. Not only what makes sense, but what generates tranquility in the depths of your being. Because God does not guide through fear, He guides through peace. And it completely changes the way you make decisions, because you stop relying only on external analysis and start paying attention to what's going on inside you, in the environment of your mind, in the silent responses that come up when you consider one path or another. And perhaps now you will begin to understand why some choices in the past have brought weight, even when they seemed good, and others have brought peace, even when they seemed difficult. It was not chance, it was direction. And if in this moment, as you listen to this, someone has come to your mind, someone who needs that peace, someone who is facing confusion or doubt or restlessness, maybe that's not coincidental either. Write that person's name in the comments as an act of faith, as a silent intercession, because when you do that, you join a spiritual stream where lives are presented before God. And I believe that this peace that begins within you can also reach that person. And after all this, there is an even deeper level of this communication, because God does not only speak to guide small decisions of the day-to-day, He also plants within the mind something that has the power to completely change the course of an entire life. A call that begins almost imperceptibly, but that grows over time until it becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe you've felt it without understanding it, a constant restlessness, a thought that comes back over and over again, a feeling that there is something you need to do, something bigger than routine, bigger than the ordinary, and even trying to put it aside. It's still there, insistent, silent, but firm. This is not anxiety, it is not chance. This can be a calling. Moses lived exactly this process. Even before the burning bush, before the visible manifestation, something was already being worked on within him, a growing awareness of the situation of his people, a restlessness that led him to act, even without fully understanding. And when the time came, God only confirmed externally that which had already been awakened internally. In Exodus 3:10 it is written, "Come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh." This reveals a powerful pattern. God first plants, then confirms. First it speaks within, then it manifests outside. And those who do not learn to recognize this process often miss the moment, ignore the beginning of something that could completely transform their destiny. Because these thoughts are not common, they carry a different weight. They remain even when you try to ignore them. They come back even when you get distracted, as if they were calling you to something that has not yet been fully revealed, but that has already started inside you. And here there is a very important key. The call of God rarely begins with total clarity. It begins with an impulse, a direction, a seed that needs to be recognized and cultivated. And the more you pay attention, the more it grows, the more it becomes clear, the more it starts to make sense. But when it is ignored, muffled, cast aside, that voice does not disappear. It just becomes more distant, more difficult to perceive over time. And maybe now you're starting to remember something you felt before, something you tried to ignore, but never completely went away. And if this is still there, even after so long, maybe it's not too late, maybe it's exactly time to start paying real attention, because great transformations don't start with big signs. They start with small thoughts that carry an eternal purpose within them. None of this is happening by chance. If you have come this far, it is because there is something being awakened within you, something that can change the way you see your own life and the directions you have taken. Stay until the end, because what is yet to be revealed may be exactly the missing piece for you to understand what God has already begun to speak within your mind. And it is precisely when everything seems confusing on the outside that something begins to organize itself inside, because there are moments in life when the mind is taken by doubts, paths close, decisions seem risky, and no direction seems totally safe, as if you were standing at a point where any choice can change everything, and yet none of them seem clear enough. And it is in this scenario that many think that God is silent, when in fact it is exactly the opposite. It is in these moments that he speaks the most. Because when external certainties disappear, the only direction that remains is the one that is born within the mind. A silent conviction that does not depend on evidence, does not depend on guarantees, but that still carries an inexplicable force, as if something inside you says that this is the way, even if you cannot explain why. Abraham lived this intensely. He was called to leave everything he knew, to leave his land, his security, his stability, without receiving a map, without knowing the destination, only with an internal direction that seemed illogical, but that carried divine authority. In Hebrews 11:8 it is written, "By faith Abraham, being called, obeyed, going to a place which he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going." This reveals something profound. God's direction is not always accompanied by details, but it is always accompanied by conviction. And this conviction is born in the mind as a tranquil certainty, which does not scream but does not disappear either, which remains even in the face of doubts, like a flame that remains lit even when everything around tries to extinguish. And maybe you're living just that right now, a time when there's no outer clarity, but there's something inside of you pointing in a direction, something that doesn't make complete sense, but it can't be ignored either. This is not confusion. This may be faith in motion. This may be God guiding you in a way that requires trust before understanding. Because the mind aligned with God learns to walk even without seeing the whole way. It learns to take steps based on conviction, not control. And the more you respond to this inner direction, the more it becomes clear, as if each step reveals the next, as if obedience makes room for new instructions. And there's one detail that changes everything. God doesn't show you the whole way at once, because that would eliminate the need for faith. He shows you enough for the next step, and he expects you to trust the process. And it is in this process that the mind begins to align deeply with the divine will, learning to recognize that even in uncertainty, there is direction, even in doubt, there is a path being formed within you. And as that direction begins to form within you, there is something even deeper going on at a level that often no one sees. Because before God leads you out, he begins restoring you from within. There are wounds that do not appear in the body, but that live in the mind, memories that still hurt, words that have been marked, experiences that have created repetitive thoughts, distorting the way you see yourself, how you see others, and even how you perceive God himself. And the quietest thing about it all is that these wounds don't just hurt, they talk. They create constant thoughts, ideas that seem to be theirs, but that were actually born from pain, feeding insecurity, fear, guilt, and even a feeling of not being enough. And while this is not dealt with, the mind remains stuck in patterns that prevent you from hearing clearly what God really means. But God does not ignore this place. He enters right there. The healing he brings does not begin outside. It begins within the mind, replacing that which has been built up by pain with thoughts that carry truth, peace, and identity. David lived this intensely. He did not hide what he felt. He took everything before God, every thought, every anguish, every inner conflict, and in this process something powerful happened. His mind was restored by the divine presence. In Psalm 147:3 it is written, "Heal the broken-hearted and bind up their wounds." This reveals that God doesn't just see the pain. He treats, he rebuilds, he rearranges that which has been broken. And often this healing happens silently, through new thoughts that begin to emerge, ideas that confront old lies, truths that begin to replace what you have believed for so long. Maybe you've felt it without realizing it, that moment when a different thought arises, telling you that you can start over, that you're not alone, that what you carry doesn't define who you are. This isn't just positivity, this is God speaking directly into your mind, bringing healing where there was pain before. And the more you allow those thoughts to linger, the more they begin to transform how you see yourself, how you react, how you live. Because true healing doesn't just happen when the pain disappears, but when the truth takes the place that the pain once occupied. And maybe today, as you listen to this, something inside of you is being touched, some memory, some feeling, some area that needs this restoration. And if this is happening, don't ignore it, because this could be the beginning of something that God is doing inside of you right now. That word didn't come to you by chance. If this spoke to your soul in any way, write in the comments, "I trust in God," as a simple act, but full of meaning. Because sometimes a small decision makes room for deep healing to begin within the mind. And there is a moment in life when something inside the mind simply awakens, as if a fog begins to dissipate and suddenly you see clearly what once seemed normal. It's as if for a long time you've been following on automatic, making decisions, living routines, carrying thoughts without questioning. But at a certain moment, something changes, something catches your attention inside, and you begin to realize that you've moved away, not only from a path, but from a spiritual sensitivity that once existed. This distancing does not happen all at once. It is silent, gradual, almost imperceptible, and when you realize it, the mind is already occupied with other voices, other priorities, other influences that are stifling that connection with God. But what many do not understand is that even in this state, God does not move away. He begins a process of reconnection that is born within the mind itself. The prodigal son lived exactly that. He reached the most distant point, lost, confused, living a completely different reality from what was his purpose. But in the midst of chaos, something happened inside him. In Luke 15:17 it is written, "And he came to himself and said, 'How many of my father's hirelings have an abundance of bread, and I am here perishing of hunger?'" This, making it into itself, reveals everything. Before returning physically, he came back mentally. Before you changed direction, something changed within your consciousness. A thought arose, a clarity appeared, a truth was revealed in the midst of the confusion, and that was the beginning of the transformation. This is how God acts. He awakens thoughts that confront the reality you are living. He brings to mind comparisons, memories, perceptions that make you see what you did not see before. And this awakening can be uncomfortable because it reveals truths that were hidden, shows paths that have been left, points out decisions that need to be reviewed. But at the same time, this awakening carries hope, because it does not come to condemn, it comes to reconnect, it comes to bring back, it comes to show that there is still a path, that there is still a direction, that there is still an opportunity for return. And perhaps, while you listen to this, something inside you is exactly in this process, beginning to see things that once seemed normal, feeling a different restlessness, a desire to get closer, to understand, to go back to something that was left behind. This is not by chance. This is God activating your consciousness, calling you back not through imposition, but through understanding, of clarity, of revealed truth within your own mind. If you are here so far, it is because this awakening has already begun in some way. There is something being aligned within you, something that can change the way you think, feel, and live. So don't leave here, because what is yet to be revealed may be just what you need to take the next step in this reconnection with God. And there is a kind of thinking that not only guides or calms, but moves, it pushes, it insists, it comes back over and over again, as if it were trying to get you out of the place where you are. It's not an ordinary thought. It's not something fleeting. It's a sense of urgency that is born within the mind, and that the more you try to ignore, the stronger it becomes. And here is something that needs to be understood clearly. Not all urgency is anxiety. Some is direction. Because anxiety confuses, accelerates, disorganizes, but the urgency that comes from God, even though it is intense, carries purpose. It points to something specific. It does not spread its attention. It focuses. It directs. It calls. It's as if something inside you says, this needs to be done now. This can't be postponed. This requires a response. Jonah lived exactly that. When God spoke to him, it was not a suggestion. It was not something light that could be left for later. It was a direct call, clear, loaded with urgency. In Jonah 1:2 it is written, "Arise, go to the great city of Nineveh and cry out against it." And this order was not only outside, it echoed inside him, creating a weight that he could not ignore, even trying to escape. And maybe you've never noticed, but there are times when thoughts start to repeat themselves inside your mind in a different way, not as a concern, but as an insistent direction, something that comes back several times, that stays alive, that is not lost over time. This can be a wake-up call. It can be a decision that needs to be made. It can be a change that needs to happen. It can even be someone you need to look for, a word that needs to be said, a step that needs to be taken. And the more you ignore it, the more this feeling grows. Not because it wants to bother you, but because it carries a purpose that cannot be postponed. God doesn't just work calmly, He also works with time. And there are times when the right time calls for immediate action. But here's the most important point, that urgency doesn't come with desperation. It comes with clarity. Even though it is strong, it does not leave you lost. It points, it directs, it shows you exactly where you need to act. And when you answer, something aligns, something moves, as if a door that has been waiting for your decision finally opens. And maybe now you're remembering something that has been coming back to your mind in the last few days, something that you've been postponing, avoiding, or ignoring, but that is still there, steadfast, as if waiting for an answer from you. If this is happening, don't treat it as a coincidence, because it could be God calling you to act at the right time. And if you recognize that God has been good and present in your life, even in the details you didn't notice before, write Amen in the comments as a simple way to recognize this, because sometimes a statement makes room for you to respond more clearly to what God is already saying within you. And when this transformation begins to take place within the mind, something inevitable arises on the outside, because what God does on the inside never remains hidden forever. Thoughts change, attitudes change, decisions change, and suddenly those who look from the outside begin to realize that there is something different, something that cannot be explained by human effort alone, because the change was too deep, too real, too constant to be ignored. This is how the mind becomes a living witness. It's not just about what you say, but about how you think, how you react, how you see situations that used to shake you and now no longer have the same power. It is when someone realizes that you are firmer, more at peace, more directed, and begins to wonder what happened, because that is not common. That did not come from outside. That was born inside you. Paul is one of the strongest examples of this. He didn't just change his behavior, he had his mind completely transformed. Before, his thoughts were aligned with persecution, judgment, and violence. But after his encounter with Christ, something changed radically within him. His mind was renewed, and it became visible in everything he did. In Acts 9:15 it is written, "This is a chosen vessel for me to bear my name before the Gentiles." Notice that even before the actions, God already saw what Paul would become, because true transformation begins in the mind. And when this change happens, it becomes proof of the supernatural, because no one can sustain a profound transformation for long without something greater sustaining it. And maybe you are starting to live this process now, small changes that seem simple, but that, when added together, begin to create a new way of living. Thoughts that once dominated you no longer have the same space. Reactions that were automatic are now different. Decisions that were once confusing now begin to have more clarity. This is no coincidence. This is God working within your mind. And the most interesting thing is that you may not even realize how much has changed, but other people are starting to see it. They perceive it in their way of speaking, in their way of acting, in their way of facing problems. And without you having to explain, your life begins to become a living testimony of what God can do. Because when the mind changes, everything changes. And this is one of the greatest proofs of God's action, not something distant, not something theoretical, but something visible, practical, real. A transformation that starts silent, but becomes impossible to hide over time. And this raises an important question within you. If God has already begun to change your mind, how far can this transformation go? What can still happen if you continue to allow Him to guide your thoughts? This word is not for everyone. It is for those who are ready to realize what God is already doing inside. If you've made it this far, there's something being revealed especially for you. Don't leave now, because what is yet to come can show you an even deeper level of this transformation that begins in the mind and changes destinies. And when this transformation advances even further, something profound begins to happen within the mind. Because God is not just changing isolated thoughts, He is changing the way you see yourself. And that changes everything, because the way you think about yourself defines the decisions you make, the boundaries you accept, and even the kind of life you believe you deserve to live. Many people carry within their minds labels that have been built throughout their lives, words they have heard, experiences they have lived, mistakes they have made. And all of this forms a distorted identity, an internal image that limits, that imprisons, that makes the person believe that they cannot, that they are not enough. And the quietest thing about it is that these thoughts seem true because they have been repeated so many times that they have become natural. But when God begins to speak to you through the mind, He doesn't just guide paths. He confronts that constructed identity. He reveals something completely different, something that doesn't come from the past, but from purpose. Gideon is a clear example of this. He saw himself as weak, hidden, incapable of doing anything big, someone who lived limited by his own perception. But when God spoke to him, did not confirm what he thought about himself, God revealed who he really was. In Judges 6:12 it is written, "The Lord is with thee, O mighty man of valor." Notice this, God called someone who saw himself as weak, valiant. That wasn't just a pretty word, it was a redefinition of identity. It was God planting a new thought within Gideon's mind, something that at first seemed far from reality, but which carried spiritual truth. And that's exactly how God acts. He begins to insert thoughts that conflict with what you've always believed about yourself. Thoughts that say you can, that you are capable, that there is something greater within you, even if everything around you says otherwise. At first, this may seem strange, even difficult to accept, because the mind is still accustomed to the old pattern. But the more you allow this new truth to remain, the more it begins to replace the old, the more it gains strength, the more it becomes real within you. And when this happens, something changes visibly. Your decisions begin to reflect this new identity. Your attitudes begin to follow what you have come to believe, and suddenly you no longer react as before, you no longer limit yourself as before, you no longer see yourself as before. Because when God changes the way you see yourself, He changes the way you live. And this transformation does not happen from the outside in. It starts in thought, in what you accept as truth within your mind, and expands to all areas of your life, aligning who you are with what God has always seen in you, even when you still couldn't see it. And as this new identity begins to take hold within your mind, God adds another layer to this process, something that brings even more security and clarity, because He doesn't just speak in the silence of your interior, He also confirms it on the outside, through people, encounters, and words that seem to come at exactly the right time. It's as if what you've been feeling inside began to echo outside of you, as a confirmation that it wasn't imagination, but direction. This happens because God works in unity. He aligns the inside with the outside, making what has been planted in your mind be reinforced through the community of faith. In the book of Acts, we see this movement happening clearly when leaders were gathered seeking God, and a direction that already existed began to be collectively confirmed. In Acts 13:2 it is written, "The Holy Spirit said, 'Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them.'" Notice that God did not start there, He confirmed it there. The call already existed, it was already being worked on within them, but at that moment there was an external confirmation, bringing security to take the next step. And this continues to happen to this day. God uses people to confirm what He has already spoken to you in secret. Maybe you've experienced it, when something was clear inside you, but there was still a doubt, and suddenly someone says something, a message arrives, a word is released, and it connects exactly with what you were feeling. It's not a coincidence, it's alignment. It's God showing you that you're not walking alone, that He's confirming every step. And this does not mean depending on others to hear God, but understanding that He uses people as instruments of confirmation. Because when the inner and outer align, confidence increases, fear decreases, and the decision is strengthened. But here there is an important detail. These confirmations do not create the direction, they only confirm. If there is nothing being worked out inside your mind, there will hardly be anything to be confirmed outside. Therefore, everything begins in the secret, in the silence, in that place where God speaks directly to you. And the more you learn to recognize this, the more you begin to realize how God organizes encounters, words, and situations in a precise way. As if everything were connected, as if each piece was being positioned at the right time to give you clarity and security. And perhaps now you begin to remember times when this has already happened, when something inside you has found confirmation outside, when a doubt has been answered through someone, when a direction has been reinforced by an unexpected word. Have you ever imagined how many people still need to live this type of experience? How many are waiting for a confirmation, for a word, for a sign that can reach them through something simple? If this message made sense to you, enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because by doing so, you help this word to reach other lives that are also in need of this confirmation that starts in the mind, but reveals itself clearly on the way. And when this confirmation begins to manifest, something even more impressive happens, because what God has spoken inside your mind begins to find evidence outside of it, as if the invisible began to materialize in small signs that fit perfectly with what you have already been feeling. And it is at this point that many doubts begin to disappear, because it is no longer just an internal perception. There is now a clear alignment between what you have thought and what begins to happen around you. But there is an important detail that few understand. The signs do not come to replace the voice of God in your mind, they come to confirm. If you try to live only looking for external signs without developing internal sensitivity, you end up getting lost, because the signs make sense only when there is already a direction being formed within you. Abraham's servant experienced just that at a decisive moment. He needed to find a wife for Isaac, a mission that required precise direction, and before any sign happened, he was already seeking God internally. There was already a willingness, a surrender, a sensitivity. Then he made a specific request, something that would serve as confirmation of what was being guided within him. In Genesis 24:14, it is written, "Let the maiden be to whom I say, lower your jar. Be it." And the most impressive thing is that the signal happened exactly as he had requested. This was not luck, it was not coincidence, it was alignment. It was God externally confirming what was already being conducted internally. And that's how it happens. When the mind is aligned with God, the signs start to make sense, situations start to fit, meetings seem to happen at the right time, doors open or close in a way that confirms what you already felt inside. It's not something confusing. It is something that brings clarity, because there is harmony between the inside and the outside. Maybe you've experienced moments like this, when something inside you pointed in a direction and suddenly circumstances began to confirm it so precisely that it was hard to ignore. This is God working in an integrated way, showing that He is not limited to a single means of communication, but connects thoughts, situations, and signals to guide you safely. And the more you learn to recognize this, the more confidence you gain to follow what God puts inside your mind, because you realize that He doesn't just speak, He confirms, He sustains, He guides in every detail. And this creates a different security, not based on control, but on trust, because you begin to understand that you are not walking alone, that there is a direction being built from the inside out and confirmed from the outside in, as a path that is revealed step by step, in a clear, firm, and impossible to ignore way. And when this harmony between what God speaks inside and confirms outside begins to be established, something essential starts to be built inside your mind. Something that sustains you even when nothing around you seems to cooperate. Something that does not depend on circumstances, nor on immediate results, but that remains firm regardless of what you see. This is faith, but not a superficial, emotional, or fleeting faith. It is a faith built, nurtured, and strengthened within the mind. Because true faith is not only born from visible miracles, it is born from what you choose to keep in your thoughts every day. This is why so many people experience spiritual ups and downs, because they depend on what happens outside, but they do not take care of what remains inside. And God makes it clear that the place where faith is strengthened is in the mind, in continuous thought, in what you decide to remember, repeat, and believe. Joshua received an instruction that reveals this secret directly. In Joshua 1:8 it is written, "Do not let the book of this law depart from your mouth, but meditate on it day and night." This was not just a religious recommendation, it was a spiritual strategy. God was teaching that the strength to keep going, the courage to move forward, and the steadfastness to win are born of a mind fed by truth. Meditating is not just reading, it is thinking continuously, it is bringing to mind, it is repeating internally until it becomes part of you. And when thoughts begin to align with God's promises, something changes within you. Doubt loses ground, fear weakens, insecurity diminishes, and a conviction begins to grow quietly but powerfully. And this conviction does not depend on immediate proof. It remains even when everything seems otherwise, because it was built in the right place. That's why some people are able to keep going even in the midst of hardship, because they're not sustained by what they see, but by what they believe inside their minds. And perhaps now you begin to realize how much your thoughts have influenced your faith, because what you feed internally becomes the basis of what you live externally. If the mind is full of doubt, life reflects insecurity, but when the mind is aligned with the Word, life begins to reflect firmness. And this doesn't happen automatically. It's a daily choice, choosing what to think, what to focus on, what to believe. And the more you do this, the stronger your faith becomes, the more stable you become, the more prepared you become to face any situation without losing direction. And if at this moment this truth is making sense to you, perhaps it is time to assume it in a simple but powerful way. Write in the comments, "God takes care of me," as a statement of faith, because what you declare begins to gain strength within your mind, and what is strengthened within you begins to transform everything around you. And when faith begins to strengthen within your mind, something even more powerful comes into play. God's promises are no longer just written words or distant stories and become living realities within you. Because a promise only begins to transform life when it is activated in consciousness, when it stops being something you know and becomes something you really believe in. Many people know promises, they have heard them, they have read them, they have repeated them, but they continue to live as if they were not real because they have never allowed these truths to occupy space in their minds constantly. And it is exactly here that the Holy Spirit acts, bringing to mind at the right moment what God has already declared, rekindling hope when all seems lost, strengthening the heart when doubt tries to dominate. Sarah lived this process in a profound way. She received a promise that, to human eyes, seemed impossible. Time passed, circumstances did not help, logic said it would not happen. But God did not just speak once, He reaffirmed. He kept that word alive until the right moment. In Genesis 21:1 it is written, "And the Lord visited Sarah as He had said." Notice this, it was not just the fulfillment, it was the fidelity to what had already been said. And this is the point that many do not understand. God does not forget what He promises, but the human being often lets this promise be erased within the mind, allowing other thoughts to occupy this space. But when God activates that promise again within your consciousness, something changes. You start to remember, you start to see differently, you start to feel that it's still possible, even if nothing around you has changed. And this activation is not emotional, it is spiritual. It is God bringing to light what needs to be remembered so that you continue walking. And maybe now you are at a time when you need exactly that. To remember something that was promised, to rekindle a hope that was extinguishing, to bring back a truth that was forgotten in the midst of circumstances. Because when the promise occupies the mind, it begins to prepare the way for the fulfillment. It sustains you until it becomes real. And the more you allow these promises to remain alive within you, the more your mind is strengthened, the more your faith stabilizes, the more you position yourself differently in the face of situations, because you are no longer reacting to what you see, but responding to what God has already said. What you are hearing right now may be just what you needed to reactivate something that was dormant inside your mind. Many people miss the moment because they don't notice this sign when it arrives. Stay until the end, because what is yet to be revealed may be the missing key for you to understand what God has already declared about your life. And as all of this begins to align within your mind, an even deeper experience arises, something that no longer depends solely on thoughts, directions, or confirmations, but on an ongoing, silent, and powerful realization that God is present. Not as a distant idea, not as something that appears only at specific moments, but as a living consciousness that accompanies you, as if the invisible became real within you. Because there is a dimension where you don't need external signs to know that God is there. You just perceive it. It is a sensation that cannot be explained completely, but can be felt clearly, as a presence that surrounds your thoughts, that calms your mind, that brings a quiet assurance that you are not alone. even when everything around you seems silent. Jacob lived this in a remarkable way. He had an encounter with God while he slept, but the most impactful thing was not only what he saw, it was what he realized when he woke up. In Genesis 28:16 it is written, "Indeed the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." This phrase reveals something profound. God was already there, but Jacob was not yet aware of it. And that's exactly how it happens. Many times God is already present in your life. He's already moving. He's already speaking. But the mind hasn't woken up to realize it yet. And when this perception is activated, everything changes. Not because God has come to be present, but because you have come to recognize it. This awareness transforms the way you think, because your thoughts are no longer just yours and start happening before God. It transforms your decisions because you begin to consider that presence in everything you do. It transforms your attitudes because you are no longer living in isolation, but accompanied, guided, supported. And this perception does not come from effort. It is born from sensitivity. The more you quiet down, the more you observe, the more you value the inner moments, the more that presence becomes evident. And there comes a point where it's no longer something you seek, it's something you carry. The mind then becomes a constant altar, a place where God is not only remembered, but perceived. And this completely changes the way you live, because you no longer depend on circumstances to feel peace. You don't depend on signs to be sure. You don't depend on explanations to continue. You just know. And this knowledge does not come from logic. It comes from presence, a presence that manifests itself in silence, in thoughts, in pauses, in details, creating a continuous connection that transforms each moment into a space of communion, where God is not distant, but present, real, and active within his own mind. And even when this presence already begins to be perceived, there are moments when the mind seems to collapse, as if everything that was aligned suddenly becomes heavy, confusing, exhausting. These are periods when doubts, emotional fatigue, repetitive thoughts that drain energy, and even the feeling that something has been lost along the way. And it is precisely in these moments that many believe they are moving away from God, when in fact they are entering a deep process of renewal, because God does not ignore the state of your mind. He enters into it. He doesn't wait for you to be strong to speak. He speaks just when you're weak, when your mind can no longer sustain the same pace, when exhaustion begins to take place. Elias lived this intensely. After great victories, after moments of power and manifestation, he simply exhausted himself. His mind could no longer sustain him, and he reached a point of wanting to give up. But God did not confront him with demands, did not require force, did not bring pressure. God brought care, brought restoration, brought simple and necessary direction. In 1 Kings 19:7 it is written, "Get up and eat, for your way will be very long." This reveals something powerful. God begins to restore the mind with simple steps, reorganizing the interior before demanding any advancement. And maybe you're right at that point right now, tired inside, with thoughts that seem confusing, with a sense that you've lost the clarity you once had. But that doesn't mean God has stepped aside. It may mean that he's working in a deeper way, rearranging what you can't see. Spiritual renewal does not happen only in moments of strength. It happens mainly in moments of weakness, when God begins to align his thoughts again, bringing small directions, restoring his energy little by little, bringing clarity where there was confusion. And notice how he does this, not abruptly, but gradually, one thought at a time, one direction at a time, as if he were carefully reconstructing something within you. And the more you respect this process, the more you begin to feel the change. The mind calms down, the thoughts are organized, clarity begins to return. And this shows something important. Even the strongest need to be renewed. There is no weakness in recognizing this. There is wisdom. Because when you allow God to treat your mind at that level, You don't just recover, you come back more aligned, more aware, more prepared to keep going. And if at this moment there is something weighing inside you, something that needs this renewal, maybe it's time to not keep it just for yourself. Write your prayer request in the comments, put before God what is in your heart, because when you express it, you make room for something new to start being done within you, and together, in faith, something can start to move powerfully in your life. And in the midst of this process of renewal, something begins to take shape in an almost imperceptible way, because God rarely reveals everything at once. He works in details, in fragments, in small thoughts that seem simple, but that carry within them parts of something much greater. And this is precisely where many get confused, because they expect a complete, clear, immediate answer, while God is releasing direction in small portions within the mind. These are ideas that emerge gradually, a concern that appears without explanation, an interest that grows differently, a specific restlessness that begins to repeat itself, as if pointing to something that is not yet fully visible. And at first, this may seem too small to matter, but that's exactly how the purpose begins to be revealed. Nehemiah lived this process in a profound way. Before any action, before any plan, something was born within him, an intense concern for the situation of Jerusalem. It wasn't something imposed from outside, it was something God put inside your mind, something that started out as a persistent, silent, but impossible to ignore thought. In Nehemiah 2:12 it is written, "And I declared to no one what my God had put in my heart." Notice this, God has placed in the heart, that is, within the mind, within the consciousness, before any outward manifestation. And Nehemiah didn't go out talking immediately, he kept it, he observed. He allowed it to grow, to get organized, to gain clarity over time. And this is a powerful principle. The purpose does not arrive complete, it reveals itself progressively. God connects ideas, thoughts, directions, like pieces of a puzzle that begin to make sense as you pay attention. And the more you value these little inner signals, the more they become clear, the more they connect, the more they form a path. Maybe you're living just that right now, thoughts that come up over and over again, interests that seem different from the ordinary, directions that begin to form without complete explanation. And the mistake would be to ignore this because it seems too small, when in fact it may be the beginning of something much bigger. Because God does not begin with the visible, He begins within. He plants first in the mind, then develops, then reveals. And those who learn to value these silent beginnings begin to see the purpose being built even before it becomes evident. And there is something very important about this. Not everything needs to be shared at the beginning. There are processes that need to mature within you, take shape, gain direction, before they can be exposed. And this is not hiding, it is protecting what is still being formed. And the more you respect this time, the more you realize that nothing is random, that every thought has a role, that every direction is part of something bigger. And little by little, what seemed fragmented begins to come together, revealing a clear, firm and meaningful path which began with something simple, but loaded with purpose from the beginning. And there is a point in this journey when everything seems to stop inside, as if the pain takes up so much space that no other thought can form clearly. Moments when the mind becomes heavy, silent, without direction, as if each attempt to find an answer only increases the emptiness. And it is exactly in this scenario, where everything seems distant, that God chooses to speak more intimately, closer, more deeply. Because when emotional pain reaches that level, external words are no longer enough. Advice doesn't reach, distractions don't solve it. What the mind needs at this moment is something that comes from within, something that touches the thought directly, bringing calm where there was agitation before, bringing rest where there was weight. And that's how God works, not just changing circumstances, but coming into the mind to transform what is being felt. Anna experienced this kind of pain, a deep, constant, silent anguish which no one around could solve. But instead of keeping it only within herself, she poured herself out before God, opened her mind, her thoughts, her innermost pain. And something happened at that moment, something that was not visible to others, but that completely changed his interior. In 1 Samuel 1:18 it is written, "So the woman went her way and ate, and her countenance was no longer sorrowful." Notice this carefully. The circumstance had not yet changed, the miracle had not yet happened, but her mind had already been restored. Sadness gave way to peace even before the answer arrived. This reveals a powerful principle. God does not wait for the scenario to change, to bring comfort. He changes the inside first. And maybe you're living in exactly that kind of moment, where something inside you needs rest, where thoughts are heavy, where the mind doesn't seem to find relief. But it is in this place that God begins to insert different thoughts, thoughts that calm, that bring a sense of care, of presence, that something is being dealt with even if you do not see it. And these thoughts do not come with noise, they come softly, like a relief that cannot be explained but can be felt. It is as if, little by little, the mind slows down, the weight decreases, and a new perspective begins to emerge. And the more you allow this to happen, the more you realize that true peace does not come from without, it is born within, the moment God touches your mind and reorganizes what was disordered. And if at that moment you felt something different, a calm coming, a word that seemed direct to you, maybe that's no coincidence. You were reached because you were chosen, and if that truth touched your soul, write in the comments, "God chose me," as a simple way to recognize that He is acting exactly where you need it most. And there comes a time when it is not enough just to feel peace. It is not enough to just perceive direction, because there are decisions that put you in front of complex paths, where logic is divided, options seem equally possible, and any choice can have profound consequences. And it is in this type of situation that many get lost, because they try to solve it only with reasoning, only with analysis, only with what they can see, without realizing that some decisions require something more. They require spiritual discernment. Because not everything that seems right is the best way, not everything that seems logical is aligned with the purpose, and this is exactly where God begins to act more specifically in the mind, bringing clear impressions, directed thoughts, a perception that goes beyond appearance. It's not just about choosing between right and wrong, but between what feels good and what is really from God. Solomon understood this before he even needed to decide. He didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for power, he asked for something much deeper. In 1 Kings 3:9 it is written, "Give therefore to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people." He called for discernment, a mind capable of seeing beyond the obvious, beyond the surface, beyond first impressions. And God answered that request. This shows that discernment is not something you build on your own. It is something that God gives, something that develops when you begin to depend more on inner direction than on outer appearances. And this direction does not come with confusion. It comes as a progressive clarity, as if little by little you begin to see what was previously hidden. Perhaps you have experienced moments when everything seemed undefined, but there was an internal sensation pointing to a specific path, something that was not fully explainable, but that made sense on a deeper level. This is discernment in action. It is God organizing your thoughts so that you can see beyond what is visible. And the more you learn to recognize this, the more confidence you develop to make decisions without being paralyzed by doubt. Because discernment does not eliminate the responsibility to choose, but it illuminates the way for the choice to be made wisely. And that requires something essential: to slow down the mind, to observe more, to listen more, not to react immediately, but to allow that understanding to form clearly within you, because hasty decisions ignore discernment, but aligned decisions are born from a mind that learns to listen. And maybe at this moment you are facing an important choice, something that needs more than logic, something that requires this inner clarity. And if this is happening, it may be that God is already starting to show you the way, not in a blatant way, but through thoughts that bring direction, that make sense in a deeper way. Maybe you've been waiting for an answer for a long time, trying to understand which way to go, and this moment may not be just another content, it may be an answer being built within you. Stick around until the end, because what is yet to be revealed can bring you exactly the clarity you need to take the next step safely and peacefully. And there are moments when everything around seems to collapse at the same time, situations that get out of control, doors that close, news that discourages, and the mind begins to be pressured by thoughts of defeat, as if there was no way out, as if everything was heading towards the end. And it is exactly in this scenario that something different can happen, because when the outside points to failure, God begins to act inside, inserting something that does not make sense to logic, but that sustains the soul. Hope. Not a superficial hope based on illusions or human expectations, but a silent force that arises within the mind, almost like a simple thought that refuses to disappear, saying that it is not over yet, that there is still a way, that there is still something that can happen. And this kind of thinking is not born of circumstances, it comes from God. Jeremiah lived this in one of the most difficult moments, surrounded by destruction, seeing everything around him crumble, with no visible signs of change. But even in this scenario, he made a conscious choice within the mind. In Lamentations 3:21 it is written, "I want to call to mind that which can give me hope." Realize the strength of this, he decided what to think about. He chose to bring to mind that which strengthened, not that which destroyed. And this reveals a powerful principle. Hope can be renewed when you direct your thoughts to what God has already declared, to what still remains true, even when everything seems otherwise. And maybe today you are exactly in this kind of scenario, looking around and seeing more problems than solutions, more questions than answers. But there is something that can change inside you right now, the way you feed your thoughts. Because when God begins to insert thoughts of hope, he is not ignoring reality. He is showing that reality is not yet the end. And these thoughts come in a subtle but persistent way, as a reminder that you have overcome other situations, as a conviction that there is still purpose, as a peace that begins to emerge even without explanation. And the more you decide to focus on that, the more that hope grows, the more it gains strength, the more it starts to sustain you. And it doesn't just change what you feel, it changes how you react, how you decide, how you continue. Because a mind with hope does not stop, does not give up, does not surrender easily. It continues even when it does not see everything clearly. And that's how God keeps you standing, not only by changing the scenery, but by strengthening your mind to get through the scenery. And maybe now you're realizing that there's still something inside of you that you haven't completely given up, something that you still believe in, even if quietly. If this message has reached you at this moment, it may not be by chance. Maybe it's just God rekindling something inside your mind. And if you want to continue receiving words like this, which strengthen, direct, and renew, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave your like, because this allows this message to continue reaching other people who also need that hope that starts inside the mind. And when that hope begins to take hold within the mind, something even stronger begins to take shape, because it's not just about continuing, but about winning. And that victory doesn't start on the outside, it starts inside, in an invisible place where battles are fought every day. Thoughts against thoughts, doubts against convictions, fear against faith. It is in this silent field that the real result begins to be defined, long before any external manifestation takes place, because every spiritual victory is born first as an inner certainty. Before any visible change, something has already been decided within the mind. And this is exactly what many do not realize. They expect to feel victorious after everything is resolved. But God works in reverse. He strengthens the mind first, so that victory already exists within you, even before circumstances change. David lived this clearly in front of Goliath. While everyone around saw a giant that was impossible to beat, he saw something different, not because the scenario was favorable, but because his mind was aligned with God's authority. In 1 Samuel 17:45 it is written, "You come to me with a sword, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." Notice that victory was already defined within him before the confrontation took place. He didn't go into the battle trying to find out the result. He went in already convinced of who was with him. And this conviction did not come out of nowhere. It was built within the mind, through experiences, aligned thoughts, a trust that has strengthened over time. And that's exactly how God works with you. Before changing the scenery, He changes His way of thinking about the scenery. Before removing the challenge, He strengthens your mind to meet it. Because when your mind is aligned with God, the size of the problem is no longer the main factor. Perhaps today you are facing something that seems too big, a situation that, looking at it with natural eyes, seems difficult to overcome. But the question is not just what is in front of you, the question is what is inside you. Because if your mind is filled with doubt, any obstacle seems bigger. But if your mind is aligned with the truth, even the biggest challenges start to lose steam. And this change happens from the inside out, when God begins to insert thoughts of authority, of trust, of faith, thoughts that do not deny reality, but that face it with a different perspective. And the more you allow these thoughts to linger, the more your posture changes, the more your courage grows, the more you take a firm stand. Because the real battle isn't just in what you see, it's in what you believe. And when that battle is won in the mind, what happens on the outside becomes just a consequence. Victory begins invisible, silent, but when it settles within you, it becomes inevitable. And when that victory begins to settle within the mind, something even more sensitive and profound can arise. Because God doesn't just speak to direct your own life, He also awakens you to something that goes beyond you. This is when thoughts begin to arise, not about your needs, but about other people, other situations, even realities that you do not live directly, but that start to occupy space in your mind insistently. And this is different from common concern. It's not anxiety, it's not curiosity, it's a spiritual weight, a restlessness that can't be easily explained, but that remains, as if something inside you is being called to act in a way that is not visible to the eye, but that has real impact. This is the beginning of a call to intercession. Esther lived this intensely. She was in a comfortable, sheltered position, away from the trouble that threatened her people, but suddenly a consciousness was awakened within her. An understanding began to form, a realization that she was not there by chance. In Esther 4:14 it is written, "And who knoweth whether thou hast come to this kingdom for such a time as this?" This question was not only external, it echoed inside her mind like a call impossible to ignore. And that's how God acts. He plants thoughts that awaken responsibility, that make you realize that you can do something, that you must do something, even if that something begins in prayer, in intercession, in spiritual positioning. Maybe you've felt it. Someone who comes to your mind repeatedly, a situation you can't ignore, an urge to pray that comes up unexpectedly. This is no coincidence. This could be God involving you in something bigger. using you as a channel, putting you in a place where your mind becomes an instrument of intervention. And the most powerful thing about this is that many of these battles are not visible, but they are real. While the world sees only circumstances, God raises up people who pray, who intercede, who stand in spirit. And all of this begins with a simple thought that you decide not to ignore. And when you respond to that call, something moves. You may not see it right away, but there is a spiritual connection being activated. There is something being released. There is an influence happening through your obedience. Because the mind that hears God not only receives direction, it also participates in what God is doing. And maybe now you're remembering someone, a situation, something that came back to your mind as you listened to it. Don't ignore it. It can be more than a thought, it can be a calling. Few people will understand this deeply because it requires sensitivity, it requires surrender, it requires willingness to act even without seeing. But if you're here, listening to this, maybe it's not by chance. Maybe God is speaking directly to you. Continue to the end, because what is yet to be revealed can open your eyes to an even deeper level of this communication that happens within your mind. And when that call to intercession begins to become a part of your life, something even deeper reveals itself, because it's not just about isolated moments when you notice God speaking, but about a level where your mind begins to live in constant alignment with Him. This is where communication stops being something punctual and becomes a continuous flow, a connection that does not depend on specific circumstances, but that manifests itself in the way you think, feel, and react in each situation. Intimacy with God is not measured only by moments of prayer or by words declared. It is revealed mainly in the environment of the mind. Because the closer you are to God, the more your thoughts begin to reflect what comes from Him. It is not something forced. It is not something artificial. It is natural, as if your mind is being adjusted to operate at the same spiritual frequency. Enoch lived this level in a unique way. The Bible does not describe great speeches, it does not present detailed facts, but it does reveal something much deeper about him. In Genesis 5:24 it is written, "And Enoch walked with God, and he appeared no more, because God took him to Himself." This means that his life was marked by a communion so constant, so aligned, that it went beyond the ordinary. And walking with God is not just walking alongside, it is walking in tune. This is when your mind begins to naturally reject that which is not pleasing to God, and to easily accept that which is in line with Him. This is when thoughts of peace, direction, wisdom, and truth become more frequent than anything else. And that changes everything, because you stop living reacting to the world and start living responding to God. Your thoughts are no longer dominated by fear, doubt, or confusion, but are guided by clarity, balance, and purpose. Not because you will never have challenges again, but because your mind is no longer disconnected from the source that brings direction. And this alignment does not happen all at once. It is built, it is cultivated, it is developed over time. Every moment you choose to listen, every time you decide to pay attention to what God puts inside you, every time you reject thoughts that are not aligned, all of this will shape your mind, bringing you closer and closer to that intimacy. And there comes a point when this connection becomes so natural that you no longer need to look for signs all the time, because your mind already recognizes the voice, already discerns the direction, already positions itself in an aligned way, almost automatically. And that's more than listening to God. That's living with God. It is to have a mind that becomes a reflection of this relationship, a mind that not only receives thoughts, but that has already been transformed to the point of thinking differently, of seeing differently, of living differently, because it is continuously connected with the one who speaks in silence, but transforms everything from within. And when this intimacy is established continuously, something even higher begins to manifest. Because the mind that previously only sought direction now carries authority. It's no longer just about listening to God. It's about reflecting what He says so clearly that your thoughts begin to influence the environment around you, as if what happens inside you begins to overflow outward. A transformed mind does not remain passive. It becomes spiritually active. Thoughts are no longer just internal and start to carry weight, direction, and impact. It is as if what you think, when aligned with God, begins to have the strength to confront situations, to establish peace where there was chaos, to bring clarity where there was confusion. Pedro experienced this transformation in an evident way. Before, his mind was marked by impulsiveness, fear, and instability. But after he was transformed, something changed profoundly within him. His mind aligned, his perception strengthened, and this was reflected in his posture. In Acts 2:14 it is written, "Then Peter stood up with the 11 and lifted up his voice." This simple act reveals much more than it seems. He didn't just talk, he took a stand with authority. And that authority didn't come from without. It came from within, from a mind that had been transformed, aligned and strengthened by God. And that's exactly what starts to happen when you allow your mind to be shaped in this way. You don't just react to situations, you start to influence them. You don't just observe what is happening, you position yourself clearly, firmly, with conviction, because your thoughts are no longer guided by fear and are guided by truth. And this changes the way you enter environments, how you speak, how you decide. There is a different security, a firmness that does not depend on external approval, but that is born of an internal alignment with God. And when you think this way, your words begin to carry weight, your attitudes begin to reflect authority, your presence begins to impact. And that authority is not about control, it's about alignment. It's not about dominating people, but about living so connected with God that what flows from you carries the essence of heaven. And all of this begins in the mind, in the place where thoughts are formed, aligned, and strengthened. And maybe now you are realizing that this is not far away, that this process has already started within you, that something has already been transformed, that your way of thinking is no longer the same as before. And that's just the beginning. If this message is bringing clarity to you, if it is confirming something you have already been feeling, write in the comments, "I trust in God's action," because when you declare this, you further strengthen this alignment within your mind, allowing this authority to continue growing and manifesting in your life. And when that authority begins to manifest in your life, something even deeper is required, because it's not enough to just listen. It's not enough to just understand. There comes a point where the real key to moving forward is to obey, and not an obedience based on full explanations or visible assurances, but a silent obedience, which takes place within the mind before any outward action. There is a spiritual dimension where God begins to speak more clearly as He finds someone willing to obey even without understanding everything. Because most people wait to fully understand and then act, but God works differently. He releases direction and observes if there is a willingness to trust, even when the details are not yet clear. And it is at this point that many get stuck, because the mind tries to seek logic, tries to organize everything, tries to predict results, while God is asking for only one step, only one answer, only one decision to trust what has already been placed within you. Noah lived it in a radical way. He was given a direction that didn't make sense for the context of his time, something that was unprecedented, something that couldn't be explained based on what he saw around him. There were no visible signs that justified that instruction, but there was an inner conviction, a clear direction that came from God, and in light of that, he made a choice. In Genesis 6:22 it is written, "Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, he did so." This reveals a powerful principle. Obedience did not begin in his hands. It began in the mind. It was there that he decided not to resist, not to question beyond what was necessary, not to postpone. He accepted the thought that God put and aligned his mind with that truth, even without fully understanding it. And it is precisely this that activates a new dimension of communication with God. Because when you start obeying the little inner directions, when you respond to what he puts in your mind, something opens up. Sensitivity increases, clarity grows, voice becomes clearer. But when there is resistance, when there is delay, when there is constant doubt that prevents action, this communication becomes more distant, not because God has ceased to speak, but because the mind has not yet positioned itself to respond. And maybe right now there's something that God has already put inside of you, a simple direction, a thought that you've recognized but haven't fully responded to yet. And this may seem small, but it is exactly at this point that everything begins to change. Because when the mind submits to what God speaks, it becomes a more sensitive channel, more aligned, more prepared to receive even more direction. And this silent obedience, which no one sees, that happens first within you, is what opens doors to deeper levels of understanding, clarity, and connection to God's voice. And the further you go on this journey of listening and obeying, the more you begin to realize that God does not only speak to direct, but also to correct. And this correction rarely comes in an external or overt way. It happens first within the mind, like a silent adjustment that stops a path before it becomes a major error. It's that moment when something inside you doesn't quite fit together, even if everything feels right on the outside. A subtle sense of discomfort, a questioning thought, a restlessness that doesn't allow you to move forward with complete peace. And often, this is ignored, treated as common doubt, when in fact, it may be God trying to adjust his direction. Because divine correction does not come to condemn, it comes to protect. It doesn't come to stop you for no reason, but to prevent you from following a path that can bring consequences that you can't yet see. And this correction happens in the mind precisely because that is where decisions begin. Balaam experienced this type of confrontation in a remarkable way. He had an intention, a definite path, something that seemed advantageous in his eyes, but which was out of line with God's will. And before he could move forward completely, there was an intervention. In Numbers 22:32 it is written, "Behold, I have gone forth to be your adversary, because your way is wicked before me." This reveals something strong. God can stand against a path when it is not aligned, not out of rejection, but out of care. And often, this opposition starts inside the mind, like a warning that tries to stop you from continuing. Perhaps you have already experienced this, when you were about to make a decision, and something inside you began to generate discomfort. A persistent doubt, a feeling that it was not completely right, even though all external reasons said otherwise. This is not weakness, this is discernment being activated through correction. And there is an important point here. Divine correction will not always be comfortable. It can confront your desires, it can go against your plans, it can interrupt something you really wanted to work out. But this is exactly what reveals God's care, because he sees beyond the moment, he sees the whole way. And when you learn to recognize this correction within the mind, you begin to value these signs rather than ignoring them. You come to understand that not every no is a loss, not every interruption is a delay, it is often protection. And the more you respond to these internal adjustments, the more your mind aligns, the more your decisions become safe, the more you avoid paths that could bring unnecessary pain. Because God not only guides you to the right, he also leads you away from the wrong, and he does so silently, accurately, and constantly through thoughts that correct, adjust, and reposition you on the path that has actually been prepared. And as you begin to recognize this correction happening within your mind, something even deeper unfolds, because this adjustment does not happen just once. It becomes an ongoing process. The mind is not transformed instantaneously, it is worked on over time, being refined, purified, reorganized into layers that are treated one by one, as if God were rebuilding the way you think from the base. Because there are thoughts that have been formed over years, patterns that repeat themselves almost automatically, ideas that seem natural but are not aligned with what God wants. And this process of sanctification of the mind begins right there, in the identification and replacement of these internal structures. It's not something abrupt, it's not something forced, it's progressive. God does not transform everything at once. He works with patience, gradually revealing what needs to be adjusted, bringing light to thoughts that previously went unnoticed, showing what needs to be left behind and what needs to be strengthened. Isaiah experienced a remarkable moment in this process. By having a vision of God's presence, he not only saw something external, he had an internal revelation about himself, about his condition, about what needed to be dealt with. And at that moment, there was a purification. In Isaiah 6:7 it is written, "Behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is cleansed." This reveals that God not only shows, he also treats. And this purification does not happen only in visible actions. It happens at the origin, in the thoughts, in what shapes everything that comes after. It is as if God is cleansing the source, so that everything that flows from it is different. And maybe you are already noticing this process happening inside you. Thoughts that once seemed normal now start to bother you. Ideas that were once accepted are now questioned. Internal attitudes start to change without anyone seeing. This is a sign that something is being transformed. And the more you allow this process to continue, the more your mind aligns, the more your thoughts become cleared, the more your perception becomes clear. And it doesn't just change what you think, it changes who you become. Because sanctification of the mind isn't just about avoiding wrong. It's about becoming someone who naturally thinks in line with God. This is when what once required effort now begins to flow naturally, because your mind has already been adjusted for it. And this process never stops completely. It continues, always taking you to a deeper, purer, more aligned level. And the more you advance, the more you realize that this transformation is not a burden, it is freedom, because you stop being controlled by old patterns and start living with a renewed mind. In the next few moments, something even more specific will be revealed, something that can help you identify even more clearly how God continues to work within your mind, even in the finer details that often go unnoticed. And as this purification process progresses within your mind, something begins to develop in a natural way, almost imperceptible at first, but extremely powerful over time. Spiritual sensitivity. Because it is not enough just to have the mind being transformed, it is necessary for it to become sensitive enough to perceive when God speaks. And this sensitivity is not born ready, it is built, cultivated, developed in every detail of its journey. The more your mind moves away from noise, distraction, and confusion, the more it is able to grasp what is subtle. Because God's voice does not change, it is still soft, precise, silent, but your ability to perceive that voice increases as you become more attentive, more available, more surrendered. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens through practice. Small moments where you decide to listen, small answers you give, small insights you value. And the more you respond, the more your mind adjusts, like someone who begins to recognize a voice that once seemed distant, but over time becomes familiar. Samuel lived exactly this process. He was still young, inexperienced, and could not identify when God was speaking. But there was a moment when something began to happen over and over again, a call, a voice, something he didn't fully understand, but which he decided to answer. And it was in this process that he learned. In 1 Samuel 3:10 it is written, "Speak, for your servant hears." This phrase was not just a response, it was a mental positioning. It was the moment when he opened up, made himself available, decided to listen with intention. And this is exactly what develops spiritual sensitivity, the willingness to listen, to pay attention, not to ignore the inner signs. And the more you do that, the clearer everything becomes. What once seemed confusing begins to make sense. What previously went unnoticed begins to stand out. You begin to recognize patterns, to identify when it is God speaking, to notice the difference between ordinary thought and spiritual direction. And this completely transforms the way you live, because listening to God is no longer something rare and becomes something constant. Not as an isolated event, but as an ongoing relationship where communication deepens over time. And there is something very important in this. God does not limit his voice. He speaks constantly, but there are few who develop sensitivity to listen. And that sensitivity is being built within you right now. Every moment you pay attention, every time you choose to listen, every decision to value what happens inside your mind. And the more you advance on this path, the more you realize that listening to God is not something distant. It is not something reserved for a few. It is something accessible, real, and continuous. For those who decide to develop this sensitivity and transform their own mind into a place where the voice of God not only passes, but remains. And the more this spiritual sensitivity develops within your mind, the more you begin to notice something that once seemed uncomfortable but is actually essential: silence. Because silence is not empty, it is not the absence of response, it is not abandonment. Silence is an environment prepared by God, so that something deeper can be revealed, something that would not be able to be perceived in the midst of constant noise. We live surrounded by stimuli, voices, information, racing thoughts that occupy every space of the mind. And in this scenario, what is subtle ends up being ignored. The voice of God does not compete with noise. It manifests itself when there is space, when there is pause, when there is a willingness to slow down and observe. Habakkuk understood this clearly. He didn't wait for answers in the middle of the agitation. He took a stand. He created an internal environment of attention and silence. In Habakkuk 2:1 it is written, "I will stand on my watchtower, and I will watch to see what will speak to me." This reveals an intentional stance, a decision to stop, to move away from the noise, to focus completely on what God could reveal. And that changes everything, because often the answer doesn't come for lack of space in the mind, not because God did not speak, but because there was not enough silence to perceive it. And this silence is not only external, it is internal. That's when you start to slow down your thoughts, to not react immediately to everything, to create moments where you simply observe, listen, allow something deeper to surface. And it is in this place that different thoughts begin to emerge, not rushed, not confused, but clear, organized, loaded with meaning. These are ideas that seem to come calmly, but with a depth that draws attention, as if they were placed there with purpose. And the more you value these moments, the more you realize that silence is not a waste of time, it is a space for construction. It is where God reorganizes your thoughts, where he brings answers that could not be perceived otherwise, where he aligns that which was scattered. Perhaps what is missing is not more information, more signals, more external responses, but exactly that, enough silence to listen to what is already being said within you. Because when the mind slows down, perception increases, and what previously went unnoticed begins to become evident. And this process requires intention. It requires choice. It doesn't happen automatically, but it develops when you decide to create these spaces, when you learn to value silence not as emptiness, but as a place of encounter. And it is in this environment that God's voice becomes clearer, more constant, more perceptible, not because he has begun to speak louder, but because you have finally created within your mind the space necessary to listen. And when silence becomes a place of revelation, a new level is required of your mind, because it is not enough just to listen clearly. There comes a time when you need to fully trust what has been heard. And that's one of the most challenging steps, because trusting God's voice within the mind often means going beyond logic, beyond what's comfortable, beyond what feels safe to human eyes. Because there are directions that God puts within you that don't make immediate sense, thoughts that point to paths that require courage, decisions that call for surrender without visible guarantees. And at that point, the mind comes into conflict. One part tries to analyze, calculate, predict, while the other recognizes that there is something greater driving. And that's exactly where mature faith reveals itself. Not when everything is clear, but when you decide to trust even without fully understanding. Maria lived this in a profound way. She received a message that would change her entire life, something that could not be explained by logic, something that would bring challenges, questions, human uncertainties. But in the face of all this, his response was not based on doubt or resistance. It was based on trust. In Luke 1:38 it is written, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word." This response reveals a level of delivery that goes beyond understanding. She did not ask for more signs, did not demand guarantees, did not try to control the process. She trusted. And that trust began within the mind, in the decision to accept what God had placed in it. And that's exactly what transforms the way you live. Because as long as there is internal resistance, as long as there is an attempt to control all the details, the mind remains divided. But when you decide to trust, something aligns, something stabilizes, something strengthens within you. And trusting does not mean the absence of fear. It means choosing not to be guided by it. It means recognizing that even without seeing everything, God already sees. Even without understanding everything, He already understands. And what He puts in your mind carries purpose, direction, and care. Perhaps now you are faced with something like this, an inner direction that calls for a step, a decision that requires trust, something that you feel but cannot yet fully explain. And this is the decisive point, because this is where faith ceases to be theory and becomes practical. And the more you respond with confidence, the more that relationship deepens, the more your mind gets stronger, the more you become sensitive and aligned. Because trusting in God's voice is not a one-time event, it is a lifestyle. It is an ongoing choice to believe what He communicates within you. And that opens doors to something even bigger, because when trust is established, you start to live not only guided, but sustained by that voice. And in what follows, something even deeper will be revealed. Something that can completely transform how you perceive God's presence and direction in your life. Stay until the end, because that next moment may mark a change that you will never forget. And when that trust is truly established within your mind, something inevitable begins to happen. That which was once just a thought, an inner direction, a silent conviction, begins to take shape on the outside. Because everything that God initiates within the mind was not made to remain only in the invisible, it was made to manifest itself, to become action, to transform realities. There is a powerful transition between listening and living, between receiving and acting. And it is exactly at this point that many stop, because listening to God is something profound, but obeying to the point of transforming this into an attitude requires an even greater level of surrender. And that's when the supernatural begins to become visible. Jesus lived at this level constantly. He did not act on impulse. He did not respond only to what he saw. He was completely aligned with what he received from the Father. In John 5:19 it is written, "The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do." This reveals that before any action, there was an inner perception, a clear direction within the mind that guided each step. And this shows something essential. Every external manifestation begins with an internal alignment. Before something changes around you, something needs to be established within you. Before an action can take place, a thought needs to be accepted, strengthened, and obeyed. Perhaps you have experienced moments when you felt a clear direction to act, something simple but specific, a word that needed to be said, a decision that needed to be made, a step that needed to be taken. And when you responded to that, something changed, maybe not immediately and visibly, but there was a movement, a transformation that began to happen, because thoughts from God carry creative power. They are not just ideas, they are seeds. And when you obey, you plant that seed in the physical world, allowing that which began in the mind to begin to grow into reality. And that completely changes the way you live, because you stop acting only based on what you see and start acting based on what you receive. Your decisions start to carry purpose, your actions start to have direction, your life begins to reflect something greater than just human choices. And the most impressive thing is that many of these manifestations start out in a simple, almost imperceptible way, but over time they become evident, impacting not only you, but also other people around you. Because when God starts something, He doesn't limit the reach, He expands. And maybe now you're realizing that there are things inside your mind that shouldn't be ignored, thoughts that aren't common, directions that aren't random. And this may be the beginning of something that is yet to be revealed through your attitudes. Nothing in this life happens without a purpose. And if that word has come to you at this time, perhaps there is something being activated within you right now. If you feel that this made sense, that it brought clarity, that it confirmed something that was already inside, write in the comments, "I believe, Lord," and allow this statement to further strengthen what God has already begun to build inside your mind. Everything that started as a thought within you now points to something deeper, because hearing God's voice is just the beginning. But responding to that voice is what completely transforms your life. Each direction, each sensation, each conviction that arose along this journey was not by chance. It was a silent invitation to a more intimate, truer, more constant relationship. The Word clearly confirms this in Jeremiah 33:3. "Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not." There's a promise in that calling, the promise that when you stand up, when you open up, when you decide to talk to God, something happens, something is revealed, something starts to move in and out of you. Now it's no longer about just understanding, it's about surrendering. It is time to silence everything that distracts, to put aside worries, doubts, and simply open your mind and heart. Because prayer is not just words, it is an alignment, it is an encounter, it is the place where everything you have heard so far connects directly with the one who is speaking to you. Let's pray together, trusting that God is present, listening to every thought, every feeling and every intention you carry within you. Beloved Father, your word declares in Psalm 139:23, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my thoughts." And it is with this truth that we now stand before you with an open heart and a surrendered mind, recognizing that the Lord knows every detail of our interior, every hidden thought, every silent doubt, every struggle that no one else sees. Lord God Almighty, we thank you for all that has been revealed so far, for every teaching, for every direction placed within our mind, for every moment in which you spoke, even when we did not realize it. Thank you that your voice has never ceased, that your care has never failed, because even in the midst of the noise, you have continued to be present, guiding, correcting, and calling. Now, Father, there is a sincere, deep, true surrender. We ask that you touch our minds, that He reorganize our thoughts, that He remove all confusion, all anxiety, all fear that tries to occupy the space that belongs to your truth. May every misaligned thought be replaced by clarity. May every restlessness be transformed into peace. May every doubt be confronted by your steadfast and loving voice. Teach us to recognize when you speak. Give us sensitivity to hear your whisper, courage to obey without resistance, and faith to trust even when we don't fully understand. Lord, reach out now to those who are mentally tired, those who face internal battles, heavy thoughts, restless nights. It brings rest, it brings relief, it brings renewal. For those who are facing financial difficulties, it opens doors, brings provision, shows paths. For those who face illnesses, visit with healing, restores the body, strengthens the mind. For families that are broken, it brings reconciliation, restores relationships, pours peace into homes. For those who feel lost without direction, now plant thoughts of purpose, hope, life. At this moment in silence, each heart presents before you what it needs most. Every request, every pain, every dream. The Lord is listening. The Lord is seeing. The Lord is at work. Father, we commit everything into your hands, every concern, every decision, every path that still needs to be defined. We trust that your will is perfect, that your thoughts are higher than ours, and that what you start, you are faithful to fulfill. As it is written in 1 Corinthians 2:16, we have the mind of Christ. May this truth now be established in a living, real, and transformative way within us. May your peace, which passeth all understanding, guard our minds and hearts. May your voice be clear, constant, and present each day, and may we live guided by you in every thought, in every decision, in every step. We pray trusting, surrendering, and thanking in Jesus' name. Amen. Throughout this journey, something has become clear in a profound and impossible-to-ignore way. God is not distant. He is not silent. He speaks, and often he speaks exactly in the place where few pay attention, inside your mind. Every thought that brought peace, every direction that came up without explanation, every restlessness that tried to align you, all of this may have been the voice of God trying to guide you, protect you, and lead you to something greater. This message is for you, not by chance, but because God chose you to hear it today, to awaken in you a new consciousness, a new sensitivity, a new way of living. Now, the question that remains is simple, but powerful. Will you continue to ignore these signs, or will you start listening carefully to what God is already speaking within you? And you know, it's very special to have you here, walking along on this journey, because this is not just a video, it's a meeting. It's a moment where something can start to change from the inside out. I'm really happy to know that we're connected by something so bigger. So, if this message spoke to you, if it touched your heart in any way, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, so you don't miss anything that we will still experience here. And I want to meet you too. I want to know about you, right here in the comments where you are watching, and if you feel in your heart, share a little of what you are experiencing, because your story matters. And together, we can create a chain of faith, prayer, and support. And it doesn't end here, because everything you've heard so far is just the beginning of something much bigger. In the next video, we're going to go even deeper into this understanding. We're going to go into an even stronger level about how to live in God's presence in a practical and constant way, and how to really experience God's action in your life every day. There is something prepared for you right after, something that can open your mind even more and strengthen your faith even more. So don't stop now. Allow God to continue speaking to your heart. Take the next step on this journey by watching the next video that will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to learn how to live in God's presence and experience the fullness of His plans. Don't stop here, because God still has much more to speak to you. Always remember, God is greater, and His presence is our strength. Trust Him, and He will do infinitely more than you can imagine. May God bless your life, and see you in the next video.